You know that feeling at 5 o'clock on a Friday? The one where a weight you didn't even realize you were carrying just dissolves off your shoulders. That was me, all of me. I practically floated out of the office, gave a weak wave to Sarah at reception, and didn't look back. It had been a brutal week, one of those marathon sprints of deadlines and pointless meetings that leaves your brain feeling like a wrung-out sponge. All I wanted was my couch, a pizza that was definitely bad for me, and 2 days of absolute, glorious nothing. The drive home was always the start of that decompression. About an hour, give or take, most of it on Highway 87. It's one of those older state highways that cuts through the parts of the country people forget exist between the cities. Once you get past the last suburb, it's just you, the asphalt, and miles of dark fields and skeletal-looking woods. A lot of people find it creepy, I guess. Spooky, but I'd driven it 1,000 times. To me, it was just quiet. It was the buffer zone between work and home. Tonight, the quiet was accompanied by a light, steady rain. The kind that isn't heavy enough to be a storm, but just persistent enough to make the world outside look like a blurry watercolor painting. The windshield wipers kept a steady, hypnotic rhythm, th-wumpshish, th-wumpshish. It was soothing. I had my phone hooked up to the car's Bluetooth, and my Friday Feeling playlist was on shuffle. Some upbeat, borderline cheesy pop song was playing, the kind with a bass line that makes you want to tap your fingers on the steering wheel. And I was tapping my fingers, humming along off key, feeling the tension of the last 5 days just melt away into the drizzly darkness. I was maybe 40 minutes into the drive, deep in the middle of nowhere part of the route. The last sign of civilization had been a boarded-up fruit stand about 10 miles back. The headlights of my old sedan cut a lonely tunnel through the night. The rain slicked the road, making the white lines gleam. On either side, the darkness was absolute, a solid wall of black where the fields and trees were. It's a weird kind of isolation out there. You feel like you're the only person in the world, but in a good way. Like you've found a secret, quiet corner of the universe just for yourself. I think I was halfway through a chorus, probably singing louder than I realized, when it happened. It wasn't a fade, it wasn't a crackle of bad connection. The music just stopped. One moment, a synthesized drum beat was filling the car, and the next, there was nothing. A total, instantaneous cutoff. It was so abrupt that the silence that replaced it felt loud, aggressive. It rushed into the space the music had occupied, and suddenly, all I could hear were the other sounds. The low hum of the engine, the soft hiss of the tires on the wet pavement, and that relentless, rhythmic th-wumpshish of the wipers. Sounds I hadn't even noticed seconds before were now the only things in my world. "Oh, come on," I muttered to the empty passenger seat. My first thought, of course, was the Bluetooth. It was an old car, and the connection was finicky sometimes. I glanced at my phone in its dashboard cradle. The music app was still open, the little progress bar frozen mid-song. But at the top of the screen, in the little status bar, was the real problem. No service. A little empty triangle where the signal bars should be. "Great," I said, my voice sounding small in the suddenly vast-feeling car. Dead zone. Of course. It wasn't unheard of out here. There were a couple of patches on this highway where the signal just vanished for a few minutes before popping back up. Annoying, but not the end of the world. I tapped the screen a few times, trying to get the song to play from the phone's memory, but nothing happened. I tried to skip to the next track. Still nothing. The app was frozen, probably because it was trying and failing to connect to whatever cloud service it streamed from. I sighed, a puff of frustration. The silence was really starting to get to me now. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt heavy. The rhythmic swoosh of the wipers was starting to sound less like a lullaby and more like a countdown. Thwump shish. Thwump shish. I could feel the emptiness of the road outside pressing in. I hadn't seen another car, coming or going, for at least 15 minutes. It was just me and my little metal box, surrounded by dark, wet, empty space. The feeling of being the only person in the world was starting to flip from liberating to unnerving. I need some noise, I thought. Anything. My eyes fell on the car's built-in radio. It was a simple, old-fashioned thing, part of the original console. No fancy touchscreen, just a small digital display showing the frequency, a couple of preset buttons, and a big, satisfyingly chunky dial for tuning. I hardly ever used it. Who listens to the radio anymore when you have your entire music library in your pocket? But right now, it was my only option. "All right, old friend," I said to the dashboard. "Let's see what you've got." I reached out and pushed the power button. The little green display flickered to life, showing a random frequency number. A wave of static filled the car, a harsh, grating sound, but honestly, it was a relief after the profound silence. Anything was better than that quiet. I gripped the tuning knob. It felt solid under my fingers. I started to turn it, slowly at first. The sound shifted from a low hiss to a higher-pitched shriek as I moved up the frequency band. PS's shish krrrrrrrrrrr shish. Every so often, the static would warp for a second, a ghostly sliver of a voice or a fraction of a guitar chord trying to fight its way through, only to be swallowed by the noise again. It was the sound of scanning for life in the middle of nowhere and finding nothing. Country station, maybe? Christian rock? A late-night talk show about politics? I didn't care. I'd listen to anything. I just wanted a human voice. I kept turning the dial, my thumb and forefinger working in a steady rotation. The green numbers on the display climbed. 94.5, 95.7, 98.1, 101.3. All of it was a wasteland of static. The sheer emptiness of the airwaves out here was a little staggering. It made the world feel even bigger and more desolate than the view out the windshield did. City noise, I realized, isn't just traffic and people. It's the constant, invisible chatter of 100 radio signals, Wi-Fi networks, and cell towers. Out here, all of that was gone. It was just empty. I was getting frustrated, ready to just give up and drive the rest of the way in silence, when it happened. I was turning the dial past 104.7, expecting the same wall of fuzz, but instead, the static just vanished. It cut out as cleanly and suddenly as my music had. One moment, the car was filled with the sound of a crackling electronic blizzard. The next, there was a perfect, clear, resonant signal. It was so crisp, so utterly free of any hiss or interference, it sounded like it was being broadcast from a transmitter on my own roof. The clarity was bizarre, it was stunning, it locked in and the dial wouldn't move past it, as if it had found the only thing to hold onto in the entire empty spectrum. A wave of relief washed over me. Finally, but it wasn't music that came through the speakers. It wasn't a cheerful DJ or a commercial for a local car dealership. It was a voice, and something was terribly wrong with it. It was a man's voice. Deep, resonant, and utterly, completely flat. There was no inflection, no personality, no warmth or coldness or anything in between. It was just there. It was the kind of voice you might expect from an automated system reading a phone book, except it was undeniably human. The clarity, like I said, was what got me first. It was like he was sitting in the passenger seat, but the sound was coming from all around me. James Peterson, the voice said. Emily Rodriguez. Samuel Jones. I waited for the station identification, or a transition to a song, or a commercial break. Nothing, just the list. The names kept coming, one after another, separated by a perfectly measured pause of about 2 seconds. Chloe Kim, Michael Williams, Olivia Brown. My relief at hearing a voice quickly curdled into simple confusion. What on earth was this? A post-midnight art installation broadcast? It felt too strange for that. My mind grasped for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a memorial broadcast. You know, for a disaster, or for fallen soldiers. Some stations do that, right? They read the names of the dead on an anniversary. That had to be it. It was a bit morbid for a Friday night drive, but it made a kind of sense. It would explain the somber, emotionless tone. Daniel Garcia, Sophia Martinez, David Smith. The sheer monotony of it started to get under my skin. The initial curiosity was wearing off, replaced by a growing annoyance. The silence had been unnerving, but this was worse. This was like a psychic hum, a constant, low-grade pressure on my brain. The rhythm of the names started to sync up with the hypnotic thwump shish of the wipers, creating this maddening, inescapable beat. Thwump shish, Christopher Johnson. Thwump shish, Isabella Davis. Thwump shish, Matthew Miller. Okay, that's enough of that, I said out loud, my voice sounding sharp in the enclosed space. I reached for the big tuning dial, the same one I'd just been turning. My fingers closed around the chunky plastic, and I went to give it a spin. It didn't move. I don't mean it was stiff. I mean it was solid. It felt like it had been welded to the dashboard. I twisted harder, my knuckles going white. Nothing. It was like trying to turn a picture of a knob. My brain refused to process it for a second. It just didn't make sense. It was a mechanical dial, it had to turn. I tried the other way, counterclockwise. Same thing. It was completely and utterly seized. A little flicker of something cold went through my stomach. That wasn't right. What the hell? I muttered, jiggling it more frantically now. It was useless. All right, fine. Screw the dial. I'd just turn it off. My eyes found the power button, the very same one I'd pressed to bring this bizarre broadcast into my car. It was also the volume knob. I tried to turn it down first. Again, total, absolute resistance. It wouldn't turn a millimeter to the left or right. The voice droned on at the exact same, conversation-level volume, completely unaffected. Elizabeth Wilson, Andrew Moore, Harper Taylor, okay, the power button. I jabbed a finger at its center. The button depressed with a cheap-sounding click, but nothing happened. The little green display stayed lit. The voice continued without a hiccup. I pushed it again, and again, harder. My finger started to hurt. Click, click, click. The sound was hollow, meaningless. It was like a prop button on a movie set, completely disconnected from any actual function. This was the moment the feeling in my gut went from annoyance to a very real, very sharp sense of unease. It was a specific kind of fear, not the fear of a monster in the dark, but the fear of losing control. My car was my space, my little metal bubble of safety. It did what I told it to. I turn the wheel, it turns. I hit the brakes, it stops. I turn off the radio, it gets quiet. Except it didn't. Now I was trapped. I was trapped in my own car with this sound. This endless, dispassionate litany of the dead, or whoever they were. The rain was coming down a little harder now, smearing the dark landscape outside into an impressionist nightmare. The road ahead was an empty black ribbon. There were still no other headlights, no signs of life. It was just me, the rain, the wipers, and the voice. Joseph Anderson, Abigail Thomas, William Jackson. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I tried to focus on my driving, on the glowing white lines on the asphalt. I tried to hum the pop song that had been playing before all this started, to create a competing sound in my own head. But the voice was too clear, too present. It was engineered to be heard. It cut through my attempts at distraction like a scalpel. It was all I could hear. Minutes crawled by. The list was endless. It felt like he was reading a phone book for a city of ghosts. The names were a blur of common American surnames, a cross-section of the entire country. The sheer scale of it was bizarre. This couldn't be a local memorial. What event had produced a list this long, this diverse? I felt a strange sense of dissociation setting in, my mind starting to float away from the sheer weirdness of it all. I was just driving, just listening. The world outside the car didn't seem real anymore. The only reality was the bubble of my headlights and this voice. The voice was the new normal. The road, the rain, the list. That was my universe now. I think I was starting to zone out, lulled into a state of tense resignation by the rhythm of it all, when a name cut through the haze. It wasn't a name I knew personally, not a friend or a family member. It was a name I had read in the local paper's online edition just a few days ago. A name that had been a topic of hushed conversation around the office coffee machine on Monday morning. William Baker, the radio voice said, in that same, perfectly level tone. I physically flinched. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. It couldn't be. Baker was a common name. William was a common name. It had to be a coincidence. But the voice wasn't done. For the first time, it added more information. The addition was delivered with the same chilling lack of emotion as the name itself. William Baker, 42, the voice continued calmly. Blunt force trauma, mile marker 94, Highway 87. My blood went ice cold. Mile marker 94, on this highway. That was him. That was the guy from the news. The horrible accident last weekend. A sales manager from the city. His car had veered off the road for no reason and slammed into one of the big oak trees that lined the older sections of the highway. They said he died instantly. I had driven past that very spot not 15 minutes ago, had even glanced at the torn bark on the tree and the lingering shards of safety glass glittering in my headlights like poisonous diamonds. The air in the car suddenly felt thick and hard to breathe. I stared at the dashboard, at the glowing green numbers of the display, as if they could offer some kind of explanation. This wasn't a memorial. This wasn't an art project. This was something else. This was impossible. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat against the steady, relentless whoomp-shish of the wipers and the cold, dead voice from the speakers. The list had stopped being a list of random names. It was real. At least one of them was terrifyingly, verifiably real. And the logical, terrified part of my brain screamed a question I didn't want to answer. If that one was real, what about all the others? My heart wasn't just hammering anymore. That's too simple a word for it. It was trying to break out of my ribcage. It felt like a trapped bird, beating its wings bloody against a cage, and the sound of it was a frantic, sick thudding in my own ears that was almost loud enough to drown out the voice from the speakers. Almost. Highway 87, mile marker 94, William Baker. The name and the place were a lock and key turning in my brain, opening a door to a room I never, ever wanted to enter. It was real. I squeezed the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, my eyes glued to the blacktop rushing toward me, illuminated in the lonely cone of my headlights. The rain was coming down harder now, streaking sideways across the windshield. Thwump shish. The wipers kept their mindless, steady rhythm, completely indifferent to the fact that my world had just tilted on its axis. My mind was scrambling, trying to push back, trying to build a wall of logic against the incoming tide of pure, irrational terror. Coincidence. It had to be a massive, insane, 1 in a billion coincidence. There are a lot of William Bakers in the world. There are a lot of Highway 87s in this country. But mile marker 94? After I just passed it? After I'd seen the glass on the shoulder? No, you can't rationalize that away. You can't talk yourself out of a truth that cold. I tried to swallow, but my throat was bone dry. It felt like I'd been chewing on sand. My gaze darted from the road to the dashboard. The green glowing numbers of the radio frequency stared back at me, mocking. 97.3 FM. A frequency that shouldn't even exist out here in the middle of nowhere. A ghost station, and the voice kept going. It hadn't paused. It hadn't acknowledged the bombshell it had just dropped into my car. It just continued with its awful, monotonous work. Jessica Wright, Robert Hill, Linda Scott. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the dashboard apart with my bare hands, to rip those speakers out, to make the sound stop. But I was frozen. I was doing the only thing I could do, drive. My hands were locked on the wheel. My foot was steady on the gas pedal. It was like my body had decided to go on autopilot, to just keep moving forward into the darkness while my mind was being flayed alive. Who were they? Jessica Wright? Robert Hill? Were they real too? Had they died in some mundane, horrible way? A slip in the bathtub, a faulty wire in the wall, a heart that just decided to stop? Was this some kind of divine, bureaucratic ledger being read aloud? A cosmic accounting of the recently departed? The thought was so insane it almost made me laugh, a hysterical bark that died in my throat. The road curved gently to the left, following the line of a dark, dense-looking patch of woods. The trees were black cutouts against a dark gray sky. No moon, no stars, just clouds and rain and the suffocating darkness pressing in on my little bubble of light. I felt watched. It wasn't a rational feeling. I checked my rearview mirror out of pure instinct. Nothing, just an empty, wet road stretching back into the black. But the feeling was still there, a cold prickle on the back of my neck. The feeling of eyes on me from the trees, from the sky, from everywhere. And then the voice from the radio did it again. It was another name, another common, forgettable name that I wouldn't have noticed 5 minutes ago. Lester Pike, it said, flat and dead as ever. But it didn't stop there. Lester Pike, 58, the voice continued, with that same chilling, informational tone. Cardiac arrest. Silver Creek Bridge. The air left my lungs in a rush. Silver Creek Bridge. I knew that bridge. Of course I knew that bridge. It was about 20 miles back. An old, narrow concrete bridge that crossed a muddy, unremarkable creek. And I remembered it for a very specific reason. As I drove over it, maybe half an hour ago, I'd seen something. On the narrow pedestrian walkway on the side, there had been a shape. A lumpy shape under a drab gray tarp, surrounded by the flashing red and blue lights of a police car and an ambulance. I'd slowed down, of course. Everybody does. I'd craned my neck to get a look, feeling that morbid, detached curiosity you feel at an accident scene. I'd seen a paramedic shaking his head. I'd seen a police officer talking to a crying woman. I hadn't thought much of it beyond a vague sense of sadness. Just another tragedy on a lonely road. Until now. Lester Pike, 58. Cardiac arrest. Silver Creek Bridge. That was him. The lumpy shape under the tarp was him. I had driven past his body less than an hour ago. This time, a sound did escape my lips. It was a low, strangled whimper. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a list of the dead from last week or last year. The timeline was collapsing. William Baker died a week ago. Lester Pike died an hour ago. The radio wasn't just reading a list of the dead. It was current. It was reporting them as they happened, or right after. The thought made my stomach heave. The terror was no longer a cold thing seeping into my bones. It was hot and sharp. It was pure, undiluted panic. Adrenaline dumped into my system, making my hands shake and my vision swim for a second. The car, my safe little womb of steel and glass, now felt like a coffin. A rolling coffin, and I was trapped in it with the announcer of death. I looked at the radio again. The power button. I had to try again. I wasn't just annoyed now, I was desperate. I jabbed at it, not with my fingertip, but with my thumb, putting all my weight into it. Click. Nothing. Click. 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 I was hitting it so hard I was surprised the cheap plastic didn't crack. The voice droned on, oblivious. Susan Green, Paul Adams, Karen Hall, each name was a hammer blow. Each name was a person. A life, extinguished. And this thing was their eulogy. A single, monotone mention before moving on to the next. I felt a wave of nausea. I was listening to people die. My mind started to race, trying to find an escape. Not from the car, but from the sound. I couldn't. The dial was stuck. The power button was useless. My phone had no signal, so I couldn't even blast music through my earbuds to drown it out. I was a captive audience. I started talking to it. Pleading. Please, I whispered, my voice trembling. Please stop. Just stop. The voice continued. Kevin King, Donna Wright, Stephen Clark, what do you want? I shouted, my voice cracking. What is this? It was like shouting at a mountain. The voice was a force of nature, a feature of this horrible new reality I had driven into. My shouting was just a small, pathetic noise that it absorbed without effort. I felt like I was losing my mind. The steady beat of the wipers, the constant drone of the names, the endless ribbon of wet road. It was a hypnotic, horrifying loop. I started to see things in the periphery. A flicker of movement in the woods. A shadow on the road that looked for a second like a person standing there, only to vanish as my headlights swept over it. My own paranoia was turning the empty landscape into a monster movie. How long had I been listening? 10 minutes? 20? An hour? Time had lost all meaning. There was only the before, a warm, safe memory of pop music and the simple joy of heading home, and the now. This endless, terrifying now. The fear was so overwhelming it was starting to transform into something else. A kind of numb resignation. I was so far past terrified that my brain was starting to shut down certain functions, like a circuit breaker tripping. All I could do was hold the wheel and listen and wait. Wait for what? For the list to end? For the sun to rise? For me to wake up from what had to be a nightmare? And then, the pattern broke. After one last name, Nancy Lopez, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It crashed down on me, 100 times more deafening and terrifying than the voice itself. All I could hear now was the wumpshish of the wipers and the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 5. My entire body was coiled like a spring. I was holding my breath, my eyes wide in the dark, staring at the radio as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. Why did it stop? Was it over? Was the signal finally gone? Please, God, let it be over. The silence lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. Then the radio crackled, just once, a single, sharp burst of static. And the voice came back. But it was different this time. It wasn't part of the list. It felt separate. It was the same dead, flat tone, but it was clearer, louder. As if the speaker had leaned closer to the microphone. As if it wanted to make absolutely sure I heard this next one. As if this one was the whole point of the broadcast. It spoke a name that I knew better than any other. It was my name. Anna Collins. Anna Collins. My name. The voice didn't say it with any special inflection. It wasn't menacing or dramatic. It was said in the exact same way it had said all the others. Flat, bureaucratic, and utterly devoid of life. It was just another item on a list. But it was my name. It landed in the silent, suffocating space of my car not like a bomb, but like a single drop of acid that dissolved everything. The silence that followed was worse than the voice. In the space of those 2 words, the world had gone from a frightening, confusing place to something else entirely. It was now a place that knew me. It was a place that had been waiting for me. All I could hear was the frantic, wet squeak of the wipers against the glass and a roaring sound in my ears, the sound of my own blood panicking in my veins. And then the radio crackled again, a single bit of static, like clearing its throat, and it finished the entry. 28, the voice stated, a simple fact. My age. Next, a sound tore its way out of my throat. It wasn't a scream, it was lower than that, a guttural, wounded noise that was completely involuntary. My foot, acting on some primal instinct I didn't know I had, slammed down on the brake pedal. The tires screeched, a high-pitched protest against the wet asphalt. The car fishtailed violently, the back end swinging out to the left as the anti-lock brakes pulsed frantically beneath my foot, a rapid, jarring thud-thud-thud that vibrated through the entire chassis. For a second, I thought I was going to spin out, that this was it, that the prophecy was going to fulfill itself right here. But the tires caught, and the car jerked to a shuddering, crooked stop in the middle of the empty lane. The engine was still running. The wipers were still swishing. The rain was still drumming on the roof. Everything was the same, but my world had been ripped apart. I sat there, frozen, my hands welded to the steering wheel. My knuckles were white. I was breathing in short, ragged gasps that didn't seem to be getting any oxygen into my lungs. My eyes were wide, darting from the empty road ahead to the rearview mirror, which showed nothing but more empty, rain-slicked road behind me. Next, the word echoed in the silence. It wasn't a question, it wasn't a threat, it was a status update, like a number being called at the DMV. You're next in line. No, I whispered. The word had no force. It was just a puff of air. No, this isn't real. You have to understand, my brain was trying to save itself. It was throwing up every possible defense it could muster against the pure, uncut terror that was flooding my system. It had to be a prank. That was the first, most logical thought. Some sick, elaborate prank. A pirate radio station. There are people who do that, right? They find an unused frequency and broadcast their own stuff. Maybe some twisted college kids thought it would be funny. But how? How would they know my name? Anna Collins isn't exactly Jane Smith, but it's not unique either. How would they know my age? My driver's license, maybe? Was I hacked? Was this some incredibly sophisticated, targeted psychological attack? The thought was insane, but it was less insane than the alternative. And what about Lester Pike? And William Baker? How did they know those names? The locations? The specific causes of death? Coincidence? It had to be. A series of massive, horrifying coincidences all strung together to create this one perfect, personal nightmare. I was just tired. It had been a long week. I was driving late at night in the rain. My mind was playing tricks on me. I was hallucinating the whole thing. Maybe I'd fallen asleep for a second and this was all a dream. A hyper-realistic, awful dream. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. I was still here. The green glowing numbers of 97.3 FM were still shining on the dash. The feeling of the steering wheel was still cold and hard under my hands. Okay, I said out loud, my voice shaking so badly the word came out as a stutter. Okay, very funny. You got me. Whoever you are, you win. You can stop now. I was talking to the dashboard, pleading with an empty speaker grill. The radio remained silent. The silence was an answer in itself. It wasn't the silence of a broadcast that had ended. It was a listening silence. A waiting silence. I took a shaky breath and put the car back in gear. My foot trembled as I pressed the accelerator. The car crawled forward. I couldn't just sit here in the middle of the highway. I had to keep moving. Driving felt like doing something, anything, other than just being a sitting duck. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. Still nothing, just the receding blackness. Next, the word was a hook in my brain. Next for what? An accident? A breakdown? A heart attack, like Lester Pike? The possibilities were a carousel of horrors spinning in my head. Every shadow in the trees at the edge of the road looked like a person. Every glint of light on the wet road looked like broken glass from an accident that was about to happen. I was living in the seconds before the catastrophe. It's a feeling I can't properly describe. It's not just fear, it's a kind of terrible certainty. The feeling you get when you see the vase falling off the shelf but you're too far away to catch it. You just have to watch it fall, watch it shatter. I was the vase. I started praying. It wasn't a formal, church-going prayer. I hadn't been to church in years. It was a raw, desperate bargaining with whatever might be listening. Please, God, please don't let this be real. Just let me get home. I'll do anything. I'll be a better person. I'll volunteer. I'll do anything. Just please make it stop." My voice was a pathetic whimper against the sound of the rain. The car felt so small, so fragile. A little metal box carrying me toward an appointment I didn't make. My paranoia was peaking. I felt a desperate, clawing need to see what was behind me, a better look than the little rearview mirror could give me. I risked a glance over my right shoulder, turning my head to look out the back window. All I saw was darkness. A perfect, unbroken wall of black, pockmarked by the silver streaks of falling rain. There was no one there. No cars. Nothing. A tiny, fragile bubble of relief rose in my chest. Maybe it was over. Maybe the signal had finally died. Maybe I had imagined the last part. The name, my name, the stress had gotten to me, that's all. I was just freaking myself out. I had driven past an accident, heard a weird radio broadcast, and my exhausted brain had stitched them together into a personal horror movie just for me. I faced forward again, took a deep, shuddering breath, and told myself to be rational. Just drive, focus on the road, 10 more miles to the exit, then a few more miles of local roads. I'd be home soon, I'd lock the door, turn on every light in the house, and in the morning, this would all seem like a ridiculous, bad dream. I held that thought in my mind like a precious, life-saving ember. I focused on it. I was okay. I was safe. It was just a radio. And in that exact moment of manufactured calm, my cabin was flooded with light. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was instantaneous. 1 second, the inside of my car was lit only by the faint green glow of the dashboard. The next, it was bathed in a blinding, pure white glare. It was so bright it washed out all the color, turning my hands on the steering wheel into stark, skeletal shapes. It was like the sun had risen directly behind my bumper. My eyes watered from the intensity. I squinted, my heart seizing in my chest, and I forced myself to look at the rearview mirror. It was useless. The light was too bright. I couldn't see anything but 2 huge, perfect circles of white fire. They were enormous, sitting high up, much higher than the headlights of a normal car. They filled the entire mirror. I flipped the mirror to the night setting. The glare dimmed just enough for me to see the shape behind it. And the little bubble of relief I'd been nursing didn't just pop. It was obliterated by a tidal wave of ice-cold dread. It was a truck, an old, monstrous semi-truck, the kind with a long, flat nose. It was rusted and dented, dark and ugly, a hulking beast of scarred metal. I couldn't make out a license plate or a logo or any details at all beyond its sheer, terrifying size. It was right on my tail, so close I couldn't even see the road between our vehicles. It was as if it had been born out of the darkness, spawned from the rain and the empty highway, its sole purpose to be right there, behind me. Where had it come from? I had looked back just seconds ago. The road had been empty. I swear it had been empty. There were no on-ramps, no side roads. It hadn't been there, and now it was. It didn't make any sense. The radio, which had been silent for several minutes, crackled back to life. But it wasn't the voice this time. It was a new sound. A low, deep, guttural rumble that vibrated through my seat, up my spine, and into the base of my skull. It was the sound of its engine, a powerful, hungry growl, somehow being channeled directly through my car's speakers. As if the truck itself was speaking to me. And it was getting louder. The roar filled the car. It wasn't just a sound coming through the speakers anymore, it was a physical presence. The whole chassis of my little sedan vibrated with the deep, bass-heavy rumble of that monstrous engine. It was an impossibly big sound for such a small space, like trying to bottle a thunderstorm. I could feel it in my teeth. My rearview mirror was useless, still just a blinding whiteout of those 2 high-set headlights, but the side mirrors showed me glimpses of it, a wall of dark, rusted metal that blotted out the night. It was so close, so impossibly close. It had come from nowhere. 1 second there was empty road, the next there was this. And that's when it hit me. Not a realization, a literal, physical impact. There was a jolt so violent it felt like the car had been kicked by God. My head snapped back against the headrest, then forward, the seatbelt locking hard against my chest and knocking the wind out of me. A sound, a screeching, grinding noise of metal torturing metal, ripped through the air. The car lurched, the back end slithering sideways on the wet asphalt. I wasn't driving anymore, I was just a passenger in a tin can being batted down the highway. My hands flew around the wheel, trying to correct a skid I had no control over. The car straightened out, but the message was clear. This wasn't a tailgater. This wasn't some road-raging trucker. This was something else. This was an execution. Panic is a funny thing. You think it's just screaming and flailing, but it's not. For me, it was a moment of absolute, ice-cold clarity. A single thought, pure and undiluted, cut through the noise and the fear: drive. My foot, which had been hovering uselessly over the pedals, slammed down on the accelerator. It went all the way to the floor. The engine of my four-cylinder sedan screamed in protest, a high-pitched shriek against the truck's deep-throated growl. The needle on the speedometer started climbing, 70, 80, 85. The rain was coming down harder now, the wipers flapping frantically, unable to keep up. The road was a blurry, slick ribbon in the darkness. The small car felt light, almost like it was going to lift off the road. I was pulling away. For a second, a wild, insane spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe I could outrun it. It was big and old. Maybe it was slow. I could just outrun it. The radio crackled. The truck's engine noise faded, replaced by the dead, flat voice. She is panicking. The words hit me harder than the truck had. The hope I'd felt just a moment before vanished, sucked out of the car into the storm. I let out a noise, a choked sob. He wasn't reading a list anymore. He was narrating. He was watching me. She is accelerating. The vehicle's speed is now 91 miles per hour. Shut up, I whispered, my voice a ragged tear in the silence. Shut up, shut up, shut up. The truck was gaining. Of course it was gaining. Its headlights grew brighter again, filling my car with that sterile, operating room glare. The roar of its engine returned, not just through my speakers this time, but from the world outside, a terrifying harmony of sound that surrounded me completely. Then came another jolt, harder than the first. This time it was on my left rear quarter panel. The car skewed violently to the right, toward the concrete median. I yanked the wheel to the left, muscles screaming. My tires shrieked, a sound of pure torture. I fought the slide, my knuckles white, my whole body rigid. I could see the concrete wall rushing toward me, a gray, unforgiving blur just a few feet from my passenger door. I managed to pull the car back into the lane, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was crying now, hot, silent tears streaking down my face, blurring my vision even more. It was playing with me, a cat with a mouse. It wasn't just trying to ram me off the road, it was hurting me. Corrective maneuver attempted, the voice on the radio stated calmly, as if describing a chess move. Adrenaline levels are spiking, heart rate is 158 beats per minute. How could it know that? Was there a camera in here? A sensor? Was this some kind of sick government experiment? Or was the voice just right? Was it not reading data, but simply stating a fact of the universe? I didn't know which was worse. The feeling of being watched, or the feeling of being known by something that shouldn't exist. The truck nudged me again. Gently this time, a little push. It was a reminder. I'm still here. I can do this whenever I want. No, please, I begged, talking to the dashboard, to the truck, to the voice, to whatever entity was doing this to me. Please, what do you want? Just leave me alone. The apathetic voice from the radio was my only answer. Her desperation is increasing. A futile plea. Futile. That one word broke me. It wasn't just narrating my actions, it was passing judgment on them. It was telling me I had no chance. All of this, the speeding, the steering, the crying, the begging, it was all just going through the motions until the inevitable end. The end that had already been written down on a list and announced on an impossible radio station. Anna Collins, 28, next. I glanced in my side mirror again. The grille of the truck was right there, a huge, dark rectangle of rust and hate. It was so close I could see the dents and the peeling paint in the glare of its own headlights. There was no driver visible, just a black space behind the windshield. A void. It pushed again, steering me toward the right shoulder this time, toward the dark woods that lined the highway. I corrected again, my arms aching. It was a deadly dance, and my partner was a 2-ton monster of metal and malice. How long could I keep this up? A few more minutes? A few more miles? My tank was nearly full, but my nerves were running on empty. Through the rain-streaked windshield, a flash of green. A highway sign. I squinted, trying to read it. Exit 14 Brookville, RT. 1 mile. An exit. Civilization. Away off this cursed stretch of road. A mile. At 90 miles an hour, that was less than a minute away. Could I make it? As if it had read my mind, the radio spoke again. An exit is approaching. She sees it as a possibility of escape. A pause just long enough for me to feel a sliver of hope. And then the voice crushed it. She will not make it. That was it. The final verdict from the judge and jury in my dashboard. She will not make it. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a taunt. It was a spoiler. It was the last line of my chapter, read to me before I had a chance to live it. And something inside me snapped. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't courage. It was pure, distilled rage. A cornered animal's fury. If I was going to die, I wasn't going to do it cowering while this thing read my obituary to me. I was going to die fighting back, even if fighting back was just making a single choice it told me I couldn't make. The exit was getting closer. I could see the ramp peeling off to the right, and just beyond it, through the sheets of rain, I saw something else. A flicker of neon, red and blue, a sign. It was small, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. A gas station, lights, maybe even people. It was an island of life in an ocean of death. She will not make it, the voice repeated, as if to remind me. Fuck you, I screamed, the words tearing out of my raw throat. The truck seemed to sense my decision. It surged forward, hitting my bumper again, not just a nudge this time, but a hard, committed shove, trying to push me past the exit ramp. Now. It had to be now. I didn't slow down. I didn't brake. I kept my foot pressed to the floor. The exit ramp was coming up fast, a terrifyingly sharp angle for the speed I was going. My brain screamed at me that this was suicide. The tires would never hold. The car would flip or smash straight into the guardrail at the gore point. The voice was talking again, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was only watching the point where the highway and the ramp diverge. 50 feet, 20 feet, now. Ignoring every instinct for self-preservation I had, I cranked the steering wheel hard to the right. A 90-degree turn at 95 miles an hour. The world ceased to make sense. The force of the turn threw me against the driver's side door so hard I felt my ribs protest. The car didn't turn so much as it pivoted. The tires lost all connection to reality, and their scream was the highest, most human sound of pain I had ever heard. The back end of the car broke free completely, and we were suddenly sliding sideways, out of control, a metal toboggan on wet asphalt. My view through the windshield became a chaotic, sickening blur of the dark highway, the bright lights of the gas station, the rainy sky, all spinning around a central point. I was in a full, uncontrolled spin. I closed my eyes tight. I couldn't watch. All I could hear was the shriek of the tires. Then came the sound I had been dreading. A concussive, explosive bang of metal on metal as the rear of my car, still spinning, clipped something hard. The spin became a violent, shuddering crash, and the world went tumbling. For a split second I was weightless, and then gravity reasserted itself with a final, bone-jarring slam. Silence. A profound, deafening silence. The engine was dead. The radio was dead. Even the rain seemed to have stopped. My ears were ringing. I could smell gasoline and something hot and electrical. And I was alive. The first thing I registered was the silence. It was a thick, heavy blanket of a thing. A total absence of sound that was somehow louder than the roar of the truck's engine or the shriek of my own tires. The engine was dead. The frantic flapping of the windshield wipers had ceased. Even the voice on the radio was gone. My own breathing sounded like a bellows in my ears, harsh and ragged. There was a high-pitched ringing, the kind you get after a loud concert, that seemed to be coming from inside my own skull. I smelled gasoline. That was the second thing. The sharp, chemical stink of it, cutting right through the damp, earthy smell of the rain. And something else, too. The acrid odor of burnt plastic and hot metal. My car was a wreck. I knew it without even looking. I blinked, and the world swam back into a blurry, disjointed focus. My head was pressed against the side window, which was spider-webbed with a fine lacework of cracks but hadn't broken. My seatbelt was a steel band across my chest, the only reason I wasn't crumpled against the steering wheel. Outside, the neon glow of the gas station sign painted the rain-slicked pavement in swimming pools of red and blue. The car had stopped, angled sideways, its nose just inches from a bright yellow pole protecting one of the gas pumps. I had missed it, by inches. I took a shaky breath, then another. My whole body had started to tremble, a deep, uncontrollable shudder that had nothing to do with the cold. The adrenaline was leaving, and in its place, a bone-deep awareness of what had just happened began to flood in. I looked at the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. Just the dark, empty highway stretching back into the night. It was gone. The truck, the lights, the roaring engine, it had just vanished. As if it had driven straight through the exit and kept on going, a ghost ship sailing off the edge of the world. Then, movement, a figure, silhouetted against the bright lights of the convenience store. Someone was running toward me. The car door was wrenched open, and the dome light flickered on, casting a weak, yellow glow over the disaster inside. Jesus Christ, ma'am, are you okay? Can you hear me? The voice belonged to a kid, no older than 19 or 20. He had a thin mustache that was more of an idea than an actual mustache, and he was wearing a blue smock with a Gas and Go logo on it. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. I tried to say something, but all that came out was a dry croak. I just nodded, a pathetic little bob of my head. Okay, don't move, he said, his voice shaky but trying for authoritative. I saw the whole thing. The spin, everything. I'm calling 911 right now. Just stay put. He fumbled with his phone, his thumb jabbing at the screen. I watched him, detached, like I was seeing it all in a movie. It didn't feel real, none of it felt real. The chase, the voice, the crash. It was a nightmare I was struggling to wake up from. I unbuckled my seatbelt, the click echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. My body protested with a dozen sharp, angry pains. I pushed myself upright, ignoring the kids' pleas to stay in the car, and stumbled out onto the wet asphalt. The cool, damp air felt good on my face. The rain had softened to a fine drizzle. I leaned against the cool metal of my car's roof, my legs feeling like jelly. The full extent of the damage was obvious now. The entire rear driver's side of the car was caved in, a mangled ruin of steel and plastic. The back tire was shredded, the axle bent at a sickening angle. This car was never going to be driven again. Skid marks made a chaotic black arc across the entire entrance to the station, a perfect record of my final, desperate maneuver. I looked at the kid. He was talking into his phone, words tumbling out. Yeah, a huge old truck just kept ramming her, black or dark blue. I couldn't tell, no, it just kept going, straight down the highway. He was my witness. I wasn't crazy. It had really happened. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees washed over me. It wasn't long before I heard the sirens. A distant wail at first, growing steadily closer until a police cruiser and then an ambulance came screaming off the exit ramp, their flashing lights turning the entire gas station into a strobing, chaotic disco. The next hour was a blur of questions and blankets and paramedics checking my vitals. I was bruised and shaken to my core, but miraculously, I wasn't seriously injured. The paramedic kept shining a light in my eyes, asking me what year it was, who the president was. I answered him automatically, my mind elsewhere. I sat on the bumper of the ambulance, a scratchy wool blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and watched the police work. A middle-aged officer with a kind face and tired eyes eventually came over to take my official statement. His name tag read Miller. He had a small notepad and a pen that clicked. Okay, Miss Collins, he said, his voice calm and steady. I know you're shaken up. Just tell me everything you remember, from the beginning. And so I did. I told him about my drive home from work, about my music cutting out, and then I told him about the radio. I tried to find a station, I explained, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. But I could only get one. It was weird, just a voice. A man's voice, reading a list of names. Officer Miller scribbled in his notepad, not looking up. His face was professionally blank. And then, I continued, my throat tightening, it read the name of a man who died on this highway last week. It said how he died. Then, it said my name. It said, Anna Collins, 28, next. I paused, waiting for a reaction. A laugh, a look of disbelief. He just kept writing, his expression unreadable. I felt a desperate need to make him believe me. That's when the truck appeared. It came out of nowhere. It just started hitting me, pushing me. And the voice on the radio, it started narrating what I was doing. It said I was panicking. It said I was speeding. It even knew my heart rate. I was rambling now, the words spilling out. It said I wouldn't make the exit. And I just had to prove it wrong. I just turned the wheel. I know it sounds insane. I finally fell silent, my story hanging in the damp air between us. Officer Miller stopped writing. He looked up at me for the first time, really looked at me. His eyes were patient, but there was a deep-seated weariness in them. The look of a man who has heard 1,000 wild stories from people in shock. A voice on the radio, he repeated softly, more to himself than to me. And the radio was stuck? You couldn't change the channel or the volume? No, I insisted. Nothing worked. It was just stuck on that voice. He nodded slowly. Okay, ma'am. We put out an alert for a truck matching that description. Sometimes a dashcam from another vehicle catches something. We'll do our best. He motioned with his head toward my ruined car, which another officer was now circling with a flashlight. I'm just going to take a closer look at your vehicle myself. See if there's any paint transfer. Check out this radio situation you're talking about. You just sit tight. He walked away, leaving me with the younger officer who offered me a bottle of water. I took it, but my hands were shaking too much to open it. I just watched Officer Miller approach my car. I watched him shine his big, heavy flashlight through the passenger window, then through the shattered back window. He opened the passenger door and leaned inside. He stayed in there for a long time, so long that it started to feel strange. I could see the beam of his flashlight moving around the dashboard. What was he looking for? Was he trying to get the radio to work? Was he going to come back and tell me I was a liar, that it was just a normal radio station and I'd imagined the whole thing? In that moment, I almost hoped he would. I would rather be crazy than for any of this to be real. Finally, he backed out of the car and closed the door gently. He stood there for a moment, his back to me, just looking at my car. Then he turned, and the look on his face was wrong. It wasn't skepticism, it wasn't pity, it was a deep, profound confusion. He looked from my car to his flashlight, and then to me. He started walking back over, much slower than before. My heart started hammering against my ribs again. Ma'am, he began, and his voice had lost its professional calm. There was a new note in it, something unsettled. Anna, I've got a strange question for you. What is it? I whispered. He stopped a few feet away from me. He seemed to be choosing his words very carefully. This radio you were listening to. The one that was stuck on that station, with the voice. I just nodded, unable to speak. He took a breath. Ma'am, he said, his voice dropping an octave lower. I don't understand how you were listening to a radio at all. He let the words hang there in the night air. The entire radio unit has been ripped out of your dashboard. It's not broken. It's gone. It looks like it's been gone for a long, long time. There's nothing there but an empty hole and a couple of cut wires. I stared at him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sirens, the flashing lights, the rain, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. My gaze slid past him, to my car. The younger officer had my driver's side door open now, and his own flashlight beam was pointed directly at the center of my dashboard. It illuminated a dark, rectangular cavity, a black hole filled with shadows and the glint of severed copper wire. The place where my radio should have been. I felt the blood drain from my face. My breath caught in my chest. The blanket slipped from my shoulders and pooled at my feet. The voice, the list of names, Anna Collins, 28, next. If it wasn't coming from the radio, where in God's name was it coming from?